Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session where the topic is DFARS 7012. We've got special guests today, both from the Defense Acquisition University, as well as one of our senior executives from Exostar. A little bit of housekeeping up front just to start with. This is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour, including Q&A. At the top of the hour, we'll, if we're still going, we'll definitely bring it to a close. Participants will be muted to enable the speakers to present without interruption today. A large portion of today's event is going to be answering questions that have been pre-submitted from the audience. So stay tuned for that. In case of an outage, please wait for a minute and refresh the page. We've yet to have this happen, but just as a precautionary thing, we like to put it in there. Also, for your convenience, there's a link in the YouTube description that's got a glossary of commonly used terms and acronyms and initializations that we're going to be referencing during today's webinar. It's sometimes, a little bit like speaking Greek, so that's where we try to include those things for you to reference. It's also being recorded and will be available on demand in our Exostar resource library post-event as well. And if you've got additional questions or follow-up that you'd like to get to with one of our industry experts or to get a copy of the slide deck, just reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or you can also use our live chat feature for any requests. And this is our main website at exostar.com. So for an agenda, we'll first go through some quick introductions. And then we're going to have first the Defense Acquisition University, Christopher Newborn. He'll present from his perspective. We'll have a CISOs perspective from Waide Jones from Exostar. And then we'll go directly into a Q&A. And we'll follow up as we always do with an exit poll at the end. First, for some introductions, Chris Newborn. He is from the Defense Acquisition University, and he's a member of the DoD's Acquisition and Cybersecurity Workforce, and also appointed as a professor of information technology with an emphasis on cybersecurity at the DAU since 2015. He's got a significant amount of experience, not only in cybersecurity, but in procurement and acquisition, and more years experience than I can shake a stick at. So we are really pleased to have him here with us today. Waide Jones. He's our other guest. He's our Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Exostar. He's got over 20 years of cybersecurity experience between Exostar and his previous employer at Lockheed Martin. And his experience ranges from, hardcore cybersecurity, supply chain risk management, budgeting, planning, and, the full range of, security architecture analysis and those sorts of things. So a great depth of experience on hands-on cybersecurity as well. And on that front, I'm your host, Scott Armstrong, Senior Director of our risk applications here at Exostar, where we focus heavily not only on things like 171, but everything around CMMC, trying to help support the defense industrial base, get ready for the program, and truly improve your security posture as well. On that front, Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to thank Exostar for really allowing a representative from Defense Acquisition University to participate in this activity. I think this is a key and critical moment for not only the acquisition workforce, but also the industry to start figuring out, or I say, come up with a strategy of taking a look at how we're going to protect the supply chain, as well as migrate from the existing statutory and regulatory requirements, which is the DFARS 252.204-7012, which is safeguarding the controlled unclassified information that resides on contractors, networks, and or systems. And we use the NIST SP 800-171 as that guideline, but really migrating from the NIST to the CMMC framework. This is a key thing. The slide that I have here is really important for you to understand, both if you're directly supporting the government, as well as if you are a manufacturer and or a vendor and you're providing services and or products to the government. We call it the crawl, walk, and run, and it's really emphasizing the three, you want to say, DoD, DFARS provision, as well as the clauses that was invoked in regards to the interim rule back in November 30th, 2020, and or December 1st, 2020. So let me, go over that and really give you a really thumbnail projection of what is expected and what is required, and to see if this can be integrated into your business plan. The first what we're talking about is the crawl, and this is where we're getting back into the existing 110 security requirements from the NIST SP 800-171, and that's applicable to meeting the adequate security compliance from the 7012. We are utilizing, in regards to from the acquisition workforce, the NIST 800-171 DoD assessment requirement that basically measures the capability and the compliancy of industry meeting the 110 security requirements, or really the 109 security requirements, plus the submission of the system security plan. So this is a key thing. The next one from the crawl is the performing the self-assessment. And this has always been in place. The self-assessment, since we've had the 7012, was for the contractor to say, am I in compliant? Am I not in compliant? If I'm not in compliant, with the submission of the system security plan, was to also develop and submit a plan of action to say when you were going, which security requirement you are not meeting, and when you were going to meet that security requirement. Now from the interim rule, which is really if you go down to the crawl, I will just say the 7019, the contractor is required to do a self-assessment and really to upload that in what we call the SPERS database, the Supplier Performance Risk System. So this is the database that you do your self-assessment and you upload that into the database. The key thing here is that most contractors are getting that confused with the CMMC framework. This is applicable to the NIST 171 security requirements, not the CMMC framework, which is the practices and the processes. This will enable and allow the government to see where you are in regards to your compliance. Also, with the 7019, the government has a responsibility to ensure that any new contract that's going to be let or existing contracts that the contractor has uploaded their self-assessment into the SPERS database. This is a key thing. And this is where we're going to start benchmarking and trying to come up with a standard of where we are before we go to that, what you want to say, run. The next critical thing is what we're talking about is the walk. And this is where we're talking about the DFARS 252, 204, 7020. And this is getting into really looking at the government now performing assessments to the contractor, what we call medium assessments and high assessments, and determining whether the contractor is actually in compliance with meeting the 171 security requirements, or really the adequate security requirements from the 7012. Again, when we talk about the 7019 and the 7020, we're still talking about the 7012 in regards to controlled unclassified information. The good thing for the walk is that if the government performs a medium to high assessment, then we are going to use reciprocity and we're going to give you credit as you now try to obtain your CMMC framework or your CMMC certification. So if you're meeting all 110 security requirements from the 171 and you're looking to get your CMMC certification at level 3, then all it's going to be is the assessment is going to be a delta between the 171 and the CMMC. This is going to shorten the time of the certification, as well as it's going to ensure that your CMMC assessment is going to be at a much cheaper perspective. I remember there was a question when somebody said, why in the world do I have to worry about 171 when I can do CMMC, meet the CMMC framework? Well, the whole thing is that if you're going to require the CMMC assessor to do the entire assessment of all the practices and processes, you have a less likelihood to succeed and to meet all the compliancy as well as the assessor in regards to what they are expecting if you don't do that transition. So really it is a step, a crawl, walk before you run. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, what do I need to do for CMMC framework? What do I need to do in regards to compliancy? How can I meet my level 1? How can I meet my level 3? Well, I'm going to tell you here from the government, be compliant in regards to the 171, which you are required to do from a statutory and regulatory requirement. If you meet that requirement now, then when you start doing your run, when you start transitioning to the framework, you have a vested interest in regards to not only your company, but also the government in performing that medium to high assessment. You will get a return on your investment. And the assessment from a CMMC is going to be at a much lower, time. So you're talking about, let's just say, going from 171 to the CMMC level 3, you're talking about additional 20 practices and or processes that the assessor is going to do. That's all you're talking about compared to the 130 that they would have to do from the very beginning. And you're talking about the involvement with the government of performing the medium to high assessment with you. So this is the benefit. This is the return on investment. This is the collaboration that I'm saying from the government as well as from industry to work together. Let's move to the next slide. So the purpose of this slide, and I've been asked many times to say, what's the difference? I'm really confused between the 7012 and the 7021. Well, first, the 7012, which we're calling the original DFARS, is the information type is only concerned with controlled unclassified information. Whereas when you start migrating to the DFARS 7021, which talks about the CMMC framework, you're not only including the controlled unclassified information, but also you're talking about the federal contract information. So when you look at it, you're going to have to pay for the certification for the federal contract information at level 1, as well as you're going to have to pay for the delta between the 171 and the CMMC framework for the controlled unclassified information to receive your level 3 there. So that's the first framework. The second one in regards to the reference in regards to compliance for the 7012 is the NIST SP 800-171. That's the 109 security requirements plus the submission of the system security plan. Whereas the 7021 is really the CMMC framework. That's the version 2.01. That's the latest version. When you're looking at compliancy, you're looking at the 109 plus 1 of the submission of the SSP, whereas when you're looking at the 7021, you're looking at the 5 levels of practices and processes. There should tell you right away that the complexity, migrating from the 110 security requirements, which really is a checklist, and going to the 5 levels of practices and processes is very complicated. You need to have a baseline and you need to get a reference of migrating from one to the other instead of saying, okay, I don't have to worry about the 7012. I really just want to concentrate on the 7021 in the CMMC framework. We're just trying to tell you that you need to look at the baseline and then from the baseline pivot and look at the deltas in regards to making that baseline, establishing that baseline, and migrating to the change. For the deliverables, you're talking about the system security plan, the plan of action, plus any other artifacts that are going to support either the SSP or the POAM. Whereas when you're looking at the 7021, you're really only concentrating on the system security plans plus any other artifacts that would justify and validate and verify the implementation of the practices and processes. For the validation, again, this gets back to the DoD assessment methodology, where you have the 3 levels of assessment between basic, or we call it self-assessment, medium, and high. The basic is where the contractor does their own self-assessment, whereas the medium and high assessment, the government comes in and actually performs that assessment. This is a higher assurance that you are meeting your compliance in regards to providing adequate security. And we're using the 171 version 2, which is really the 171 assessment. And this is you have plenty of it, you can get access to this. And this is what the assessors done in regards to taking a look at your security requirements and seeing if you comply or not. So you have access to the 171A, which is the assessment, as well as the DoD assessment methodology tool, which is an Excel spreadsheet. And that gets into the weighted security requirements in regards to some are 5, some are 3, some are 1. So this gets you set up of doing your own self-assessment before you even venture into what we call a 7021, where you're going to have the independent third-party organizations, which are responsible for distributing the assessors that are actually going to be doing the assessment. And then the last one is the governance. So the governance is really the interim rule, which is the 7019 and the 7020, whereas the 7021, you have the original FAR, which includes the federal contract information, and then you have the DFARS, which includes the controlled unclassified information. And that's really a quick snapshot of where you need to be and how you can venture to be successful to implement and execute the CMMC framework based upon the DFAR clause 7021. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Scott. And Scott, you're on mute.
Thank you, Chris. Before we move to Waide, I'm going to throw you a question, and this is really tied to this slide as well in the maturity levels. So when we talk FCI, and let's ignore CUI, let's say we've got suppliers in here that know they don't have CUI. What's the meaningful nature of FCI, and how does that relate to the FAR, the DFAR, and then CMMC?
Okay, great question. Most contractors, if not everybody that's dealing with the government, is going to be dealing with what we call the federal contract information, and that's really related to the, with the contractual information to say cost schedule of performance, what is required in the contract, what's the cost, what's the duration, what's the deliverable. So this is the initial establishment of the conversation between the government and industry from a contractual standpoint. Now, the change that goes on with this is most of the time we used to do this in the wild, we used to do this in the public. And because of the CMMC framework, that this particular information is not readily accessible for the public, the government as well as industry, but really the government, because we are responsible for deriving the requirements of what needs to be protected, as well as the security requirements, we're going to have to start protecting that. So that's going to have to be either through a cloud or some type of sharing process that's no longer accessible in the public. But there's still going to be a cost regarding the contractor receiving their CMC certification. There is going to be a cost associated with that. Whereas the 7012, there was no cost associated with that. Whereas the 7021, you're going to be having a cost associated with protecting, safeguarding FCI, as well as validate and verifying that with the assessor. So that, that is the difference. But the problem is anybody who's dealing with the government, and I'm saying DoD, but with the federal government, will have the requirement of safeguarding the federal contract information at level 1, whereas before 7012, there was not a cost associated with that. Over.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Waide, I'm going to go over to you now for your topic about protecting data and kind of the CISO's perspective in all this.
You bet. Thanks. I appreciate it. So, Chris kind of talked about the landscape, the regulatory landscape, and the crawl, walk, and run, and laid that out really well. And I think from my perspective, I want to talk about the whys, and at the end of the day, from a security practitioner standpoint and from a business standpoint, it's about protecting the data. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the threats, and then the response that not only that government has made, and then what do you do about it. So let's jump right into the threats. So next slide, Scott. So we have seen over the last 5 to 10 to 20 years, there's been a tremendous uptick in different types of cyber attacks, and there you've seen many in the press you've seen many in the press, SolarWinds and Pulse Secure, and there was a feeling for a long time, oh, the big companies are the only ones that are going to get hit by this. But at the end of the day, we've seen more and more about small businesses being compromised and being targeted, and costing them a significant amount of money and their partners. So, kind of going to the anatomy of an adversary, what are their desires? They really want data, and they want money. And so why would they want that? And so there's three kind of basic things that I kind of bucket them in is financial. Yeah, I want to make some money, and this is my trade craft, and this is what I do. The second is military advantage, and the third is economic advantage, doing this for God and kingdom, if you will. And some of these cyber attacks have really, when they're stealing intellectual property, X country does a tremendous amount of R&D, and that R&D gives them a military or economic advantage, and that R&D is stolen by someone else. Then that military economic advantage that was supposed to be 10 to 15 years is now all of a sudden down to 5. And so we have to do a tremendous amount, or the country that had the problem had to do a tremendous amount more. And so again, the focus is on big companies, small companies, partners, and the direct approach is not the only approach. We've heard a lot in the last few years about supply chain risk management and supply chain attacks. Hey, I can't get into the big companies, to use the parlance from the DoD. I can't get into the tier 1 suppliers. So I'm going to go to a lower tier that I know partners with these suppliers and with these tiers, and break into them and get that information that they're sharing with that partner. And then the other key piece is we've learned that this is not just a side job for many of these people. These are well-funded organizations. They're well organized. They have a command structure, and they have level 1 engineers and level 5 engineers. If you look at at any of our companies, we have those individuals that are just starting out, that are learning and that are growing, and those that have been in the business a long time that are very good at what they do. And we've seen these attacks. And if they don't have to burn, if you will, a level 1 engineer on a project, then they don't. So having that adversarial mindset and the protection mindset for us to make it harder for the adversaries is definitely something that we need to do. So next slide. So again, on the market, these attackers have a market. They have a specialization, and we're seeing some commoditization in the market. So, hey, I do this kind of thing. I do these types of attacks, aka I'm a developer, for example. And I partner with somebody else that is doing infrastructure style work. They're doing the same thing in the attack world. Well, I focus on ransomware, and I focus on initial entry or reconnaissance, and we team up and we partner together, or we buy tools from a marketplace that is available to us, that I can buy those services or products to help me break into to companies that I need. And then in the last couple of years, ransomware, we've heard a lot about ransomware, and that's become a big issue. And the costs of that ransomware has been substantial. And I by no means am opining on whether you pay a ransom or whether you're not, but the average payment that's asked for from a ransomware attack is going up. And then those who have decided to pay versus who haven't decided to pay, the recovery costs are significant. And again, I'm not focusing on the cost. What I am focusing on is that two things. One, you are a target. Whether you're a small manufacturer that only does, if you will, schematics for or manufacturing for a one widget on an airframe, or that you do electrical systems, you are a target because of the information that you have. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. So the response to the threat has been, increased regulation, and I won't cover this a whole lot because Chris did an awesome job about that crawl, walk, and run philosophy. I will note that he didn't talk about President Biden's executive order. That's a newly defined executive order that just came out. So the highest levels of government, including the president, are addressing this from the national level, and so we're not going to see less regulation. We'll probably see a bit more, and hopefully that's pulled together. But we'll see more, and we're going to see increased auditing. We need to understand where the intellectual property or where the data, in this case CUI, FCI, is going, and is it being protected? And to me, and for those on the phone that are from any size of business, this really comes down to me as just another risk management piece of our total portfolio. So as we look at our businesses, we look at the financial risk, cost, quality, schedule. We know we have to deliver the product or service that we deliver, and cybersecurity is just another one of those risks that go in the overall portfolio to create business value for our shareholders and for our customers and for our employees. And so I've split the next few slides up into people, process, and technology with the tie of really the business value that we create and how cyber can create that and help that for us. Next slide. So from a people standpoint,
Oh, sorry. There we go.
you're all right, no worries. From a people standpoint, we've got to have somebody leading the cyber efforts to identify the risk, to create plans, to provide focus. I had a mentor of mine say, hey, there's got to be someone awake at the switch. Really focusing these efforts. It really can't be somebody that has 17 other jobs and, oh, by the way, happens to think about this as well, and to do that planning, and then people at the end of the day are our biggest risks. We love them and they're our biggest assets, but they're also our biggest risks. So we have to do things like background checks. We have to have policy. Whether you picked an ISO or a risk management framework, it doesn't really matter. It's that you have that framework under which you can talk about your cybersecurity program and how you're protecting the data. Annual security compliance training. I know that's a favorite on our company. That sarcasm is intended, but it's a piece that we have to go through, and it brings things top of mind. Fish testing for all employees and contractors. We do that at least on a quarterly basis, maybe on a monthly basis, to make sure that people have the right training of knowing what they ought to do, because people get busy, and spam and spear phishing and phishing still are pretty heavy hitters in the initial attack vector. Job specific cybersecurity training for your developers and your infrastructure people, that they're properly administering and developing code. And then at the end of the day, metrics, the old adage that if it's measured, it improves. And so we have to make sure to have those, even in a small company that I'm not going to do that. There's simple ways to measure and how the cybersecurity program is going. So next slide. So from a process standpoint, access management is a major piece. There's been various attacks that we just haven't kept up on access management, and either an employee has left and done nefarious things because they didn't leave under the greatest circumstances, or somebody left or the account was dormant and somebody took advantage of that. So when you have the joiners, the leavers, and the movers, making sure that access management is kept up. Also, a least privilege, only giving people access that they need. There's no reason that I, for example, need admin access to a system. I'm a CISO, that's not in my job jar. And so making sure that those people have the right accesses to do what they need to do. In data. So Chris talked a lot about data, or at least I took away from that a lot about data, the CUI, the CDI, the FCI. And it's a driver for much of this regulation, at least from my perspective. And so that for you as a supplier or for you as a company to ask when you're working with a partner, do I really need all of this information? I've been in quite a few suppliers, businesses, and we look at the amount of data that they have, and I'll say, and we'll ask questions like things like, do you need all of this information to develop or to drive your contract or the things you do? And most of them say, no, we really don't. And so my proposal is one of the things that you ought to do is push back on or maybe not push back, but have straightforward conversations with the contracting officers, with your partners, and say, do I really need all of this to do what I need, and then keep it off. What that does for you is two things. One, it lowers the amount of business risk you have and how much CUI you have, and it makes you less of a target. And at the end of the day, this is about risk management. So that's what we're trying to do here, is to make sure that we manage that risk properly. And then isolating that CUI or that data to a particular part of your business. I know many of your businesses, or many of our businesses, have the defense industrial base is one component, government work is a component, and commercial work is a component. So making sure that you are able to isolate that data to one location sure makes it easier at audit time. And then focus on NIST 800-171 controls, and the CMMC will follow. Chris talked about this a lot. NIST 800-171, those 110 controls are the basis. So focus on that. Don't forget those. And that really sets you up for success for as you go into the CMMC world, to have those controls and the SSP and the audit objective evidence. Excuse me, the audit readiness objective evidence that one of the biggest things that an auditor will want is that you are prepared and that you look like you know what you're doing. And so having a plan that you can show them, and having that audit ready objective evidence. And what I mean by that is a bit more documentation than maybe just, hey, pulling a couple logs and throwing it out. That provides some structure and some credibility to the auditors, as well as to your company, that you're really running your cyber program the way that you need to. Next slide. Technology. So let me pause here, and some people are asking me, well, Waide, why are you talking about this? We're really here to learn about CMMC and those specific controls, or NIST 800-171 specific controls. I can tell you every one of the things that I've talked about today, I didn't say 3.8.11 is the CMMC control or the NIST 800-171 control, but every one of the things that I've talked about today are in either the NIST 800-171 or 800, CMMC compliance. These are the controls. Now, of course, there's more, and I would characterize that I picked these to specifically talk about these because, regulation or not, these are the things that, from a people and process and technology standpoint, are the most important us to focus on as you're in your road to get fully compliant to NIST 800-171, get your SSP done, and then move on to CMMC. So all one and the same. I just didn't call out the specific numbers, if you will. So from a technology standpoint, firewalls. Hopefully we're not really talking about you need a firewall, but really specifically, the key piece for me was making sure that as you get into NIST 800 171 and 172, which parallel to some of the higher CMMCs, you talk about protecting data on ingress, in other words, coming in, as well as going out. And so those are some of the controls that you'll have to focus with there. And then the layer 3 firewalls, that next generation stateful inspection firewall, and then the web application firewalls at a level 7. There's a lot there's a lot of application level vulnerabilities and threats coming at many companies today. So definitely something that you need to look at to have that protection at both layer 7 and layer 3. The zero trust networking and segmentation, really segmenting off your environment. If you have a flat environment that viruses or exploits or lateral movement can go freely, that's going to be a problem for you. And so my suggestion is segmenting that off as much as you can. Multi-factor authentication. Passwords have been supposedly dead for years, but we still use them. MFA's got to be that next piece there. Next generation, the endpoint detection. That's a beautiful technology that gives us visibility, and we can see exactly what's going on individual systems, and gives our threat teams, our intel teams the information they need to know how to react. Secure email gateways, like the phish testing, these gateways rewrite URLs or provide protections to get those threats coming in that way. And that's kind of a basic blocking and tackling, at least for me. And then business continuity. We talked about ransomware before, but there's two things that's going to go really bad in our lives. Is one, if we can't get our business up, if something happens, whether that just be a natural disaster or if it's a cyber threat like ransomware, then you have either offline backups or segmented backups such that they're bifurcated from each other, that you can't just the backup solutions. Some backup solutions are fantastic at delivering malware through the entire organization. So we have new technologies that help segment that off. So these are kind of some of the things that, that at least from my perspective, again, helps get us ready for just protecting our data, protecting our business and managing risk, and complying with NIST 800 171 as well as CMMC. So with that, Scott, back to you.
All right, thanks, Wade. That was excellent. And I'll just make a comment. I was on a DHS call after the recent Colonial ransomware incident, and the things that they brought up, their top two things were business continuity, have your backups, because if you've got that, you can restore yourself. And also the multi-factor authentication is just two definitely key things that woefully, it seems like industry and a lot of different critical infrastructure sectors are behind on.
Yeah.
Before we go into Q&A, I want to let you know, here's some useful resources that we've got, and it covers, CUI, CMMC, some of the acquisition things, more information about how to do your basic assessment with into the SPRS system. We do have partners that we list on our website as well that can help with consulting services and things of that nature, or remediation efforts if you need it. And we also have free trials for some of our solutions that are focused on CMMC as well as 171 activities. We do have an exit poll that is in the link in the YouTube description, so you can do that now or when we near the end of the session. We do like to get that information so that we can help guide future sessions. And on that front, I'm going to move into the Q&A section of our presentation. And the first one I'll bring up, and I'll send this one to you, Wade, and then we'll hear from Chris. We have a company that describes themselves as a small, medium business, 150 users, and they use commercial cloud services today. I think in this instance, it might be with like Microsoft Office 365. And their question is, and this goes into like with CUI, CMMC certifications, or even 171, do they really have to go get their entire company in alignment with those regulations and security posture? Can they do like an enclave, for instance, if you're using Microsoft or one of their government clouds, or maybe another vendor's government cloud for just the CUI and keep it contained that way? Waide, you touched on this a little bit, I think, in your presentation, but if you could just maybe give some more guidance in this scenario, because I know that this is something a lot of companies struggle with.
Yeah, you bet. It's not easy by any means, because the functionality between Gov Cloud and commercial cloud is different in a lot of these situations, and so no, I totally get it. So the question says is, can you do that completely? It depends a little bit on how you use your business. For example, if you are using email, well, how is that information, specifically in this case CUI, being transferred? How is it being shared with people? How are things happening? So I would say if you're not if you're not emailing any of this data, and you're not having any of that CUI outside of the Gov Cloud environment, and you can make sure that, and you can have that control in there, then I would say yes. I mean, there's various companies that are doing that segmentation. The tricky thing is how is that data going to get feed? And in the ease of use from email or some of the other killer apps, is the CUI going to get attached? And then you're going to have a data spill and a problem. So yes, it's totally possible. I'd really look at the business processes within your company and say, is it worth it? Because it just may not be worth it. Of how you work, you may just keep that separation and go to the high environment.
Interesting. Good feedback. Any thoughts on your side, Chris, or should we move on to the next question?
No, I just want to add one thing. Waide, you nailed it. But also on the business side, you really have to take a look at when Waide was talking about your business processes, really it's your business relationships. And many of the companies are going to have three different aspects. They're going to have a contract with the government. They're going to have a contract support agreement with the prime, and then they're going to have a contract support agreement with the prime or sub, as well as a contract with the government. So some of the manufacturer and vendors have that different perspective, and then it gets back into the information type of saying, what is the relationship and what is the information is being transferred from one entity to another in regards to, am I doing a product, or am I doing a service? So that gets back into what Waide was saying, if you're going to do email, how am I going to do that? But also it's still determining what's government sensitive information, what is contractor client information, what is proprietary information, and what should be publicly accessed. So when you fold all those in, that will probably give you a different and better perspective in regards to what you need to protect and how you need to do it, because your prime may want you to protect it just the way you're supposed to be protected to the government. Over.
All right, excellent. Chris, I'm going to toss this one to you. This is related to cost reimbursement for things related to CMMC. How do small, medium businesses, so I'm assuming this is where they're a supplier into one of the big primes or something like that. How do they get their costs reimbursed, and how does it apply to firm fixed price contracts? And any other color you might be able to provide on that front, because I'm sure there's lots of questions.
Right. This is, you want to say, this is a hard question. So what I'll do is I'll provide a response instead of an answer, and I'll go with the first one, the fixed price. So the fixed price and any other thing is you're going to have to determine what that price point is, and that's going to include the CMMC certification. And I'll go back to level one. So there is going to be a cost regarding the 7021 and the CMMC framework for getting your CMMC level one. There's going to be a cost associated with that. That's going to have to be folded into your fixed price. And that could be to the point where it may make you, as your fixed price, a higher price point, and it's going to probably not make you competitive. So again, this is a business process, and the folks on the phone that knows me, I tell the truth. I tell it like it is. I don't like to paint any fuzziness to it, but that's the fact. So that certification in regards to as you migrate from 7012 to 7021 is going to raise your price point, and it could be the point where your price point is now not competitive. I wish I had a better answer. I'm just saying, for a fixed price, if you think the government is going to reimburse, that is a challenge for fixed price, or that is a challenge for sealed bids, because the contracting officer, he's going to just see a rise into that, and he's going to say, is that reasonable, justifiable in regards to ascertaining your level 1 certification? So that gets back into, is the government going to help out in regards to your certification or not? And that gets back into, I know there's a lot of companies that are saying, I don't have to do a SSP for my level 1. However, the assessor, if you do not have things laid out in regards to validation verification in a nice, neat package, it's going to cost you a lot more to get your certification. So that's another thing that's going to drive your price point. So that's a food for thought. In regards to the other reimbursement that are not a sealed bid or fixed price, that's going to be in regards to your relationship with your contractor support agreements if you are working with a major sub and or prime. Of course, the prime is going to reap the benefits because they're going to have the direct costs. They're going to be able to show that reimbursement. But for the manufacturer or small vendors, we just don't know at the time. I know there has been information say, oh, everything's going to be transparent and you're going to be able to bubble that up. I caution that very much so. And this is you're going to have to work with your support, your contractor support agreements. Over. Maybe Waide can feed a little bit more into that though, but I'm just looking at it from a realistic standpoint. This is a new process. We do not have any case studies or anything else like that. The only thing we can do is look at the delta, and we have to see if it's reasonable. Over.
All right, that's great feedback. And I do, one of the comments I make about CMMC and a lot of these things, it's a journey we're on. And that's where I think there's, we're going to experience some things as we move through this process. One question that I've actually got a couple related to it, but this will go to you, Chris. When do we start seeing, I know we've got crawl, walk, run, and, running, that's, when we've got it in all the contracts for CMMC. When are we going to start seeing CMMC actually starting in with the initial contracts? And how does that flow seem to be going? Any updates there on the government side that we could share?
Yes. So the bottom line is, in order for the 7021 to really take truly place, you have to have an assessment. That's the bottom line. And for the CMMC framework, you're going to have the organization certified. They're going through that process right now, as well as assessors. But it's not going to just to be assessors to the prime. You're going to have sufficient assessors throughout the supply chain. But even with that, if the government was to identify their high priority procurement activities, that in itself, looking at the time, I'm looking at probably, if they're lucky, maybe, the official note is 1 October 2025. If you use the procurement acquisition lead time of saying, in order to meet that, if you go back, let's just say 18 months, now you're talking about the middle of fiscal year 23. So in reality, probably the middle part of fiscal year 23, you may see the 7021 in the RFI, request for information or request for a quote, to set up the procurement acquisition lead time to allow time to get the CMMC certification. So that's if everything's aligned and there's a sufficient assessments that are available to perform. But that's the key thing. The government is to me not going to be in the position of providing waivers because they need the information protected, and they do have the NIST SP 800-171 security requirements in place. So I could see if there was nothing there and we were just solely relying on the CMMC, statutory regulatory requirements require you to safeguard the controlled unclassified information in regards to the 171. So that's in place, and that's the baseline. That's what that's what we have to follow. But the transition to 21 is really going to be based on when the assessor is going to be available, and I really just see the soonest may be the middle of fiscal year 23. Over.
All right, thanks. Another thing that I'll call out is that the CMMC accreditation body has been holding town halls on a regular basis, and they also provide insight into kind of the pipeline of assessors and the people going through that process. So that's where we can also get additional insight into when those organizations will be ready and rolling out as well. I appreciate that.
Scott,
Yep.
I just want to add one thing in regards to that, and I believe that's an excellent thing for folks to really listen to, but I just want to get you the baseline of understanding the assessors in regards to being trained. They're being trained under the 171, which is 110 security requirements. When you migrate to the CMMC framework, you're talking about level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. Very complicated. Whereas you have an assessor, they have a set number of security requirements. CMMC varies, and that's going to be based on the sensitivity of the information and the capability of the threat. That's a real challenge. Over.
Got it. I've got several questions that pertain to where people believe that they receive CUI, but it's not marked either from the prime or the government. And this is a question for both Waide and Chris, but I'll start with you, Waide. If somebody believes that they've got CUI, but it hasn't been identified as such, what should they do? Should they be treating it like CUI anyway, or only when, their customer or the government has said this is CUI that you have?
Yeah, so definitely I've talked to somebody. You need to talk to the people with whom you work and make sure that you're clear. You're supposed to know clearly within your contract whether you have it or not. It's been said section K and L in your contracts, but it may be in other places. So it's supposed to be very clear. If you have a question, please talk to the contracting officer, talk to procurement to make sure. Because the expectation, at least from what I've heard from colleagues in the government, is, hey, listen, guys, we're giving this data to you and you need to protect it. And if you find yourself in a situation where another tier, a higher tier or partner, or the government says it's CUI, they're expecting it to be protected that way, whether they've told you directly or not. So it's in your best interest to manage that risk and to ask the questions if you're in doubt.
Any feedback on your side, Chris, where people believe they might be getting CUI and it has been marked or identified as such?
Yeah, I concur with Waide, and I just want to add one more thing to it, is that most people think in the very beginning, so in your contract, you have three phases. You have the very beginning of the contract where the government is supposed to identify. That could be through the security classification guide, scope of work, or what we call the program protection plan in regards to identifying that. So that goes in. Even if that doesn't take place during the execution of the contract, because of the maturity of the information and the aggregation, that's eventually, if it's something that's in the gray area, it's eventually going to migrate to controlled unclassified information or information that needs to be protected. And then at the end of the contract period of performance, because the maturity, because of the aggregation, when that service and or product is delivered back to the government, you better believe that it's going to probably be a 99.9% controlled unclassified information. So even if you start out in the beginning with it knotted, as you progress through the period of performance and you execute your contract, it's going to migrate. And this gets back into the risk thing that Waide was talking about, to say in the beginning, the adversary, in regards to their appetite and motivation, is not going to be that much. But at the end of the contract, because of the maturity of the information and the sensitivity, their activity is going to be much higher. Therefore, the consequence that that's going to be attacked is going to be very, very high. Over.
All right, excellent. Just we've got time for one more question. So as a reminder, if you haven't done the poll, please go do that. And I'll do one last question, and I think we can have Waide, Chris, and I all answer from our different perspectives on this one. And the question originally came in, are there any tools, templates, or other resources? And the key thing I want to bring up here is other resources available to help. In this instance, they asked for an effective SSP. But I'd like to broaden the question to say what resources are out there that folks can reach out to help prepare, whether it's for 171 or CMMC. And Chris, I'll let you start because I know you're probably aware of a lot of the government initiatives on that front, and then we'll go to Waide, and then I'll just close it out.
Yeah, it really pertains back to the DoD assessment methodology and what we call the 171A, which is the NIST SP 800 171 assessment. So when you you can Google that, pull it down, that gets down to if this particular security requirement is not implemented, it tells you the impact as well as maybe a possible implementation based on the people, process, and technology. Combining that with the DoD assessment methodology, the Excel spreadsheet, that's a great way of now coming up with you want to say what you need to do to protect the information following the 110 security requirements, and you can fold in the CMMC practices and processes in that particular spreadsheet. So to me, those two tools are great, and you can build that yourself and you can utilize, and you can probably show that as part to your assessors to say exactly where you are. It's just a matter of now making sure that you have the appropriate documentation to support that. Over.
All right, and Waide, I know you're involved with a lot of the committees and working groups that support this. What other resources are you aware of that folks might have either from industry or from the prime's perspective?
Yeah, from an information standpoint, the National Defense ISAC has got some great information on that. Many of the primes have pages on their own, but a lot of them have consolidated to the National Defense ISAC. So go to their website. They have a lot of information on not only the compliance just part of it, but the controls themselves, understanding them and helping with that. And then I think the next is going straight to NIST. That's the answers to the tests. So go to NIST AR 171 Alpha, and then the AB, the CMMC AB. They have a lot of templates and guidance there that provides some good information for us.
All right, and the last piece that I'll close out there on the My Exostar site, which is our customer support site. We've got a resource section for where we cover a lot of these external resources as well for 171. We've got links to the CMMC assessment guides and things of that nature. And we also offer 2 solutions that help automate a lot of the activities for SSP maintenance, as well as DoD scoring, POAM management and whatnot, and for developing IT policies. One of the things I want to mention with SSPs is, it's not where you write an SSP and it's one and done, you put it on the shelf, you need to maintain it. And if you look at, if you're targeting CMMC level 3 and being mature with doing it, that's where you really need to maintain it over time and being able to understand it's a living, breathing document. And you can certainly use, the templates that are out there, but that's where we offer solutions to help on that basis as well. So on that note, I think we've hit the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for their time today. You can always reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. I know we still have some unanswered questions. We ran out of time, but we'll try to get back to you on those as well. Thanks, everybody, and we'll call it a close for today.